let's go ahead and get started. Thank you very much for being here today. My name is Karen Marduk, and this session is on where to apply for graduate school. My name is Karen Marduk, and I work in the Life Design Lab. And today's presenter is my colleague, Dr. Carlos Medina, who also works in the Life Design Lab. We're going to leave some time for questions, but we encourage you to add questions to the chat at any time. And if we are able to get to those questions at the end, we'll do so. This session will end promptly at 12:50, so you have a few minutes before the noon session starts. And now I'm going to turn things over to Carlos.
Thank you, Karen. And just to clarify, 11:50 is when this will end, so don't worry, it's not a 2-hour presentation. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to day one of JHU Grad Camp 2021. We're glad you're here joining us today. My name, as Karen said, is Dr. Carlos Medina, and I work with her in the Life Design Lab, specifically working with the Center for Student Success, which supports our first-gen, limited income, and underrepresented students in their life design and career journeys. And so you all have logged in today for the presentation, Where Should I Apply? And so I'm going to tell you about some tips and tricks for how to gather information and narrow down your search process in this grad school search stage that you are either at right now or will be hopefully very soon. And so let's get started. So I first wanted to offer my story. So I did university majoring in biology. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go to grad school or not and what my plans were for that. So I took a year to work as a research technician in a lab at the Tufts Medical School. I knew I wanted to study and research asthma, but I didn't know much about the research of asthma. So I picked up a couple of journal articles on asthma and realized I could not word. There were all of these different cell types I had never heard of. And I mean, I had my bachelor's in biology, but I'd never taken an immunology class. So I knew that if I wanted to do asthma research successfully, I would actually need to learn some immunology first before applying to grad school. So I applied for and was accepted into a 2-year research post-bac program, working full-time in an immunology lab at Tufts alongside graduate students, and actually kind of fast-tracked my schedule and applied during my first year to 8 graduate programs in immunology across the country. I was invited to interview at 7 of those 8. I visited 5 of those 7, and ultimately, after a painstaking decision process, chose Stanford School of Medicine to go to for my graduate school education. And I'm not going to go into my story too much after that, but just to say that, right now I am, as Assistant Director of Life Design, finding new ways to utilize the skills I gained from my PhD outside of a laboratory to support students like you in your graduate school and life design journeys. So that's where I'm coming from, and hopefully my goal with this workshop is to provide you with some tips and tricks to help you in your grad school search and in narrowing down that process for you. So there are a lot of questions that will be answered for you throughout the next 2 days at JHU Grad Camp. And specifically, what we're going to focus on is, where should I apply? And this is a really crucial question that many students have, particularly early on in the process. There are so many different schools, and they're also distinct. And so we're going to talk about how you can, and the process by which you can end up with a nice, clear list that you can feel confident about in applying to. Throughout Grad Camp, we're going to take you through a number of different stages. Hopefully, through Smitty's presentation, you were able to talk about reflecting, understanding your why. Should I apply to grad? Why do I want to apply to graduate school? We're going to focus stage, so gathering information that in to help us decide on where to apply. We are going to, and then later on during Grad Camp, you are going to attend other workshops that will really show you how to apply and help you prepare your application, your statements, your CVs, and then also, how do I succeed in graduate school? So pulling in your identity, finding community, tips and tricks and skills for really succeeding and projecting yourself from where you are now to where you will be as a successful graduate student. So for today, in this workshop, we're going to really focus here on the where do I apply portion. So before we get into that, I'm going to talk to you about some of the challenges that we face when making decisions and when trying to narrow down our options. And this is called the paradox of choice. And I'm going to start by telling you a little story. So in 2000, there were these two psychologists, Sheena Iyengar and Mark Lepper, who published this kind of remarkable study whose conclusions were very unexpected. And they call it the jam tasting study. So what they did is one day they went to a market and put out a display of 6 jams. They offered customers, the opportunity to taste as many jams as they wanted, and they would receive a $1 coupon off of any single jam. On that day, 40% of shoppers stopped to sample. On average, they sampled about 2 jams each, and 30% of shoppers actually used the coupon and bought one of those 6 jams. The next day they went back and they brought 24 jams, so far more options, more choice. They saw that 60% of shoppers stopped to sample these jams, so they pulled in way more people. On average, they sampled 2 jams, again, so suggesting that even with more options, our kind of bandwidth for what we're willing to kind of, research, taste, test is kind of the same. It's 2 jams, that's the limit before we're willing to kind of do any more. And what they saw was shocking. The number of shoppers who actually bought jam decreased by a factor of 10. So only 3% of shoppers actually bought a jam. So even though they had more options, fewer of them bought the jam. And so why is that? Why do we see this happen? You would think with more options, more people would be satisfied. And the reason for this is what we call decision overload, which is also sometimes referred to as the burden of choice. So when we only have 1 or 2 options, as you can see on the left side of this graph, we tend to not feel very great about the decisions we make because we feel like we didn't really have very many options to choose from. But on the flip side, when we have too many options, we also don't feel great about the decisions that we make because there's this fear that we might be missing out on something better or something greater. And so what I'm going to talk to you about today are some tools and a process by which, if you go through this process, you'll be able to better understand what you're looking for in a graduate program and what you want to get out of a graduate program. And that'll help you in narrowing down your options to a select few to create this kind of sweet spot where you are able to make some decisions knowing that all of them would be good, and the one that you ultimately decide will be a successful opportunity for you. And I see some questions in the chat. For research postbacks, if you are going into a research-based postbac that's meant to prepare you for a PhD, you do not have to pay for them. And in fact, most of them offer a living stipend. So you actually get paid to do research, and they also provide additional support mechanisms to help you in your application process as well. So it's a great option. Definitely look up the NIH Postbaccalaureate Research Education. And so the process that we're going to use, you heard about from Smitty, is this kind of life design process. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but really is to identify what matters to us, empathize, and pull in lots of information. So that's this kind of growth stage. Map it out here as well in the double diamond format. So that's this growth stage. Then we need to contract and narrow down our options and define, what the real question in the problem is. And then, through other workshops, you'll begin to ideate and expand and come up with more options, and then find ways to kind of prototype and test before you even arrive at graduate school to ensure that you'll be successful in that stage. And so for this workshop, we're really going to focus here on this empathize, so gathering information, and define stage, how to narrow down our options. And so how do we gather information? There's a lot of information out there, but I wanted to break it down into these 3 categories and tell you where you can go to get this information, what to look for, and then how to kind of evaluate that information. So we have research, advice, and reflection. The first is, so research is really any information that you can gather on your own by going on websites and sorry, I was looking at the chat. By going on websites, going to different pages, and looking for this information online. The first place you want to look is typically the university or institution's website. There are a lot of different things you should be looking for. And of course, things like, name recognition and prestige often come in when talking about. But some other things to really pay attention to are things like their commitment to their graduate student population, the funding they have to support their graduate students during their training, the support that they offer, the institutionalized support that they offer for their graduate students. Do they have an Office of Graduate Education that really supports students in their, academic and personal goals? Do they have a career services office or maybe a life design that supports graduate students, or futures, as we at Hopkins, that supports graduate students in their kind of life design and career goals? You also want to pay attention to the overall kind of commitment of the institution to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and ensuring that it's meeting the needs of its graduate students who attend from all different backgrounds. And so myself being first generation, limited income, and Latino, it was important to me to find an institution that valued those things. And then lastly, you can find information about the demographics of the institution as a whole, and maybe even about the area that the institution is in. Next, you kind of want to narrow that down a little bit to the program department's website. So each program will have a website where they'll talk about their program's focus, whether they're an umbrella program that includes many smaller programs within it, or a specialized program. They'll talk about program requirements. What are the things, components of your graduate school process, the classes you'll take, the things you're expected to do and learn. It's important to, oftentimes they'll have a guidebook you can look at. It's important to look at this and get all that information early on so you know what the expectations are coming in. Also, some programs have teaching requirements and others don't, and these may or may not be tied to the funding mechanisms of your graduate school time. And so it's important to keep that in mind. If you see yourself going into a faculty position or academia or being a teacher in some way, finding a program that supports and encourages you in your teaching is really important. If you see yourself going into, professional world or the business world or something like that, where you don't foresee yourself teaching or needing that kind of teaching experience or pedagogy, then you might want a program that has those options but doesn't make it a requirement. The next place to look is the actual kind of research group, and more narrowed down at the faculty level. So some of you might be, engaging in programs, master's programs that are very coursework based, and that teach you a lot of information through classes. But it's really important to keep in mind the research that is done at that institution by the faculty, because that will shape and define what you're taught, how you're taught, the skills that you learn, the network that you're a part of. Even if you're taking classes that are exclusively, information-based. Now, if you're doing a research master's, like writing a thesis, or going for a PhD or something like that, then taking a look at the research groups that are there is really important. Not only for potentially picking your research group or your lab, but you can also begin to see trends in what different institutions focus on. So when I was over at Stanford Immunology, their focus was really on adaptive immunity. That's not to say there aren't amazing people who work in other areas of immunology. There absolutely are, but you could tell that there was a little bit of a focus in that area, whereas another institution might be more focused on innate immunity. And so you can begin to see some trends when you look at the research group level as well. And then lastly, student organizations. So trying to figure out what student groups there are on campus, what opportunities there are for you to connect with other students, to be involved and engaged. Maybe they have volunteer opportunities. I know that we had student groups that were focused on science communication, which is important to some people. There was a group called Science Pen Pals, where you had a pen pal who was a high school undergraduate student, and you kind of wrote letters back and forth to them talking about the work that you do and the life of a scientist. And we all think about the work that we're going to be doing in graduate school. Making sure that you're aware of what the community is like is really, really important. All right, so these are all the things you can kind of find on your own, just going on our websites and looking them up. But we all know that what you see on a website is only half the picture, and piece of information that you want to gather really is advice from people, from individuals. And so there are 4 groups again that you can reach out to get some information. The first is current graduate students. So you can go again on the program website, and maybe they have a list of their current graduate students. You can also find them on the faculty or research group pages. You can talk to them, about the work that they're doing, what they're studying, their research, but also ask them some questions about the program, the institution, the community that they find there, what funding mechanism looks like, how supported they are in their graduate education and research, and how supported they are in their other endeavors outside of the research group or classes or the lab. You want to take all comments, both positive and negative, with a grain of salt, right? A grad student, who everything is going well, they're getting good grades in their coursework and their research project is moving along, will probably have a rosy picture of graduate school that maybe doesn't, show some of the other challenges you might face. Someone who maybe is struggling through graduate school, or maybe they just did an experiment and it didn't work out and they're frustrated, might not have the most positive picture of graduate school. Both are very valid, and it's important to get both perspectives, but also take both with a grain of salt and recognize the ways in which your experience might be the same and different from their experience. When reaching out to graduate students, and here is a tip that comes from being a graduate student and being reached out to, you want to reach out to just a select few individuals. Pick 3 or 4 people who you feel you can identify with. Maybe they come from the same undergrad as you, the same hometown. Maybe they have are part of a student group that you want to be engaged in or involved in. Maybe they do research that you're really excited about. But select a handful and reach out to them directly and specifically. Don't send a mass message to every graduate student in the entire program. We all are interconnected. We talk all the time. I remember getting messages from people in my immunology cohort saying, "Hey, did you get an email from this person asking to chat?" And when we had all gotten it, it was the exact same email. It was very clear that they were just kind of trying to find an in and get information rather than like being genuinely interested in our individual experience. So be specific in your outreach, but do talk to a fair number of people, maybe 4 people in a program, I think is a good number to aim for. So along with graduate students, one thing that people often forget is that graduate programs have alumni. They have people who have gone through the process and are out on the other side and can really maybe have had a year or 2 to reflect on their graduate school experience and synthesize that into kind of a cohesive idea and provide some really clear feedback. Recent program alumni can be fantastic to talk to about their current role and what they're doing now, their path to get to where they are and what that was like for them. But also questions like, how supported did they feel during graduate school? How supported did they feel, in pursuing the path that they chose? And so if they were in an academic area, academic focused, group, and they went into industry, were they provided the support from their advisor, from their program to gain the skills that they needed to be successful? You can also ask, how typical their path or experience might be. Sometimes websites will highlight their kind of stellar program alumni, the ones who all went on to faculty positions. But you want to get a sense of what the average student experience is like for most people and where most people go. Some schools seem to pump out faculty. Some schools really, a lot of their alumni go into industry or business. And so these are things to keep in mind when you're considering a graduate program, not just the experience during it, but also after. All right, next, you really want to talk to your network. If you are considering graduate school, hopefully that means you've taken some coursework and have had some exceptional professors. Maybe you've done some research, a research group or a lab. And so you have people who are connected to this world who can give you some insight and who also know you as a student or as a researcher. Talk to them and ask them for any tips or insight. What are some great programs in the field? What are some great institutions that you should be looking at or thinking about? You might that they'll know of programs that are well-known and exceptional programs in that discipline and in that field that maybe you originally hadn't considered. So when I was in my post-bac program, I went to my advisor there, the chair of the program. I went to my undergrad advisor, and I talked to people and said, what are some great programs in immunology that maybe I'm not aware of or don't know about since I'm new to this field, that if you were looking to hire a postdoc or a scientist coming out of graduate school, what are some programs where, like, if they came from that program, you knew that they had a really good training and really good knowledge? These are all important questions to ask because they'll have some insight and say, you might not be considering the school, but actually they do amazing work and they're really well known in their field, and I think you should consider it. Now, if you don't feel like you have people who have that inside information, and you're a Hopkins student, go on OneHop. OneHop is a platform where there are about 2,300 alumni who have volunteered to sign up to connect with and advise students. And there are a number of them who've gone on to, who are Hopkins undergrad alumni who've gone on to graduate school. There are also alumni from graduate programs at Hopkins. And so, reach out to a few of them and talk to them about their experience and their advice.
We have a really great question, so I want to stop you so you can answer it for someone. The question is, what do you do if you loosen ties with your network, or if a lot of time has passed since you were last in school? Which is a really great question I get from students all the time.
That is a great question. I will say, if you're in school, keep in touch with your mentors and advisors and faculty and professors and the people you've worked with. And if a lot of time has passed, honestly, you can reach out. So I've sent emails to my boss from the Tufts core facility where I worked as a technician. I've reached out during graduate school, and I think it was 2 years since we last talked, just to let them know, like, hey, I wanted to check in. Here's how I'm doing. Things are going well. I got this award, and I just wanted to say thank you for all of the training that you provided me and the opportunities that you gave me, and they've made a huge impact on me. You'd be surprised, even if years have passed, how happy and thrilled someone is to hear that they made an impact on someone's life, particularly one that has lasted, years beyond when you've last made contact. And so I would say, reach out to those people, rebuild that connection, and recognize that they're probably really thrilled to know that there's someone who remembers them and remembers the impact that they had on them. So that would be my piece of advice. Great. All right, and so for the last place to go for advice, and this one many people don't really consider, but it's your peers who are also applying. Graduate school, academia, these industries are very small worlds. You will interact and be in touch with these people likely for the rest of your career, particularly if you plan on going into research or being a faculty member, entering academia. These will be your peers, not just today, but for the rest of your career. So make some connections, meet some people at Grad Camp. I see people commenting in the chat, make those connections in the chat and the lunchtime socials, add each other, find people who are applying to the same programs or different programs, and keep in touch. I know I have a friend who applied to medical school. He said he went to Reddit a lot to ask for help and advice, and that there was a pretty strong community of applicants that he built and that he considers friends. And now many of them are going off to medical school, at the same time. And that's a network that you can rely on when you're applying, and then also as you're going through graduate school. All right. And so the last thing is reflection. And this, Smitty talked about, really understanding your why. But you want to take some time to actually do that and think about why you're applying, where you want to apply, what are your views and values, what do you need out of graduate school? And so some things to consider, and I'll go through these pretty quickly for the sake of time, but firstly, how do you like to think? How do you like to work? And how do you like to, if you're doing research, do research? Are you a big picture thinker or detail oriented? Do you like identifying trends? Or do you really like finding that kind of specific case, that outlier, that anomaly, and really investigating that in depth? If you're going into maybe bioscience or research, are you interested in what they call basic science, which is understanding kind of the mechanisms and the underlying processes by which this thing works? Or are you interested in something more translational? So looking for where you can, make a change in the process to have a different outcome, looking for drugs or therapeutics to treat certain diseases or alter certain pathways. If you, again, are going into research, do you like wet lab work, working at a bench, or, dry lab work, which is computational data analysis? If you're going into kind of qualitative fields, do you enjoy doing one-on-one interviews, or do you enjoy doing large surveys? Understanding how you think really helps to you in deciding which program might be a good fit, which faculty members might be a good fit for you, and in narrowing down that decision. Next, think about which tasks energize and engage you. And for this, I really want to focus on tasks, because as much as grad school is about the big picture questions that you're going to ask, the day-to-day is going to be a lot of these what I would call less exciting moments. So, if you're going into something that is very computational or coding based, do you enjoy, debugging code? If you're going to a lab, a wet lab, do you like making buffers and making dilutions? If you're going to something that's qualitative or social sciences, do you enjoy, coding responses or QCing the data sets? If you're going into field work, do you like, field logging, cataloging your field samples, and creating, indexes? It's important to think about, not just the exciting moments when something works or when you learn something, brand new, but also these day-to-day moments of what you enjoy doing on a day-to-day. And you, again, when you're getting advice from people, you can talk to them about what, the day-to-day is, where they spend most of their time, to see if that feels like a good fit. Next is environment. And so you might want to think both about the program and the group you might be in, but also outside of that institution. I'm from New York City, and so I often I chose schools that were in or near kind of major metropolitan areas, because I knew that was important to me, that if I was going to be in a PhD program for 6 years, that it would have to be in a place that I would enjoy living in and being in. Maybe you want something that is more rural or more away from a big city, so that you can focus on your program and on your community that's specifically within your local area. And so it's important to think about the environment, the demographics of the city or town you might be moving to make sure that you can find an environment that you can thrive in. And related to environment, but slightly different, is location. And location is super important. As I said, being from New York and going to school at Tufts, which is in Boston, that was about a $40 bus ride that took 4 hours. I could go home every 5 or 6 weeks during undergrad to visit family. When I made the decision to go to Stanford all the way in California, I knew that I'd have to make some concessions on the number of times I could visit home. I looked up flight costs to see, the average, which is about $350 pre-pandemic for a round trip flight, but also consider some of the extenuating circumstances. So for instance, if you are looking for a flight cross country for Thanksgiving, which is a very specific set week in the year, that is $700. And so it's important to keep that in mind, that you might not have the funds or availability to spend $700 on a round trip flight. So location is an important factor. And again, thinking about the culture, the environment, the demographics of that location is also very important too. And then I see a question in the chat around difficulty of connecting during a pandemic. And professors you've only met on recorded classes and never in person. I think that's okay. You can ask them for a little bit of their time to meet. So when I was a first year undergrad, I was applying to summer programs, and I had only taken these big biology classes with like 200 plus people. But I knew I needed a letter from a biology professor as part of my application. And so I reached out to the professor who taught that huge seminar, who I had never even met in person. We were in the same room and had never interacted. And he was more than willing to kind of meet with me. We set up a quick, 15, 20-minute chat where he said, tell me about yourself. What's your interest? What are you applying to? And how can I help? And so I would recommend, shooting them a quick email, being very clear about your ask, which is, I took your class, I really enjoyed it, I'm applying to this, and I would love to talk to you about getting a letter of recommendation from you. Do you have, time to chat briefly for 15, 20 minutes about, the process? And so find that really kind of create a very distinct ask that is pretty small and specific first. And then from talking to them, you'll get to know them, they'll get to know you. Okay, so here's a big question that comes up all the time. And the question is basically, how many is too many? I know that with all the options out there and all the uncertainty, sometimes people wonder, should I be applying to 3 or should I be applying to 30 schools and programs? And so we're going to actually come back to this. And the way that what we're going to do first is jump way forward. And so we're going to jump kind of to the very end here and say that what matters is really understanding what a successful graduate experience looks like to you in the end. So when you finish and wrap up your graduate experience or on the other side, what are some things that make for a successful graduate experience? And then that will help you in narrowing down today. And so here are some things that I think make for a very successful graduate experience, and you might have similar ones or different ones as well. So in life design, we say be curious and ask a lot of questions. And that same curiosity applies and is crucial for graduate school, particularly in the topic area that you'll be learning more about or investigating. And it seems very silly to say this, but you have to be genuinely interested in the topic and in the field and in the content, the knowledge, the question being asked. You'd be surprised how many people, maybe enjoyed their classes in undergrad, that was the major that they picked, and they go to graduate school because they feel like it's the next logical step. But they enter without a real curiosity, a genuine curiosity for the topics or the questions at hand. And that's okay. You can still, find that inspiration when you're there at graduate school, but really having that interest and that curiosity going in will motivate you throughout your time in graduate school, which is very difficult. There's a lot of work that goes into graduate school, and having that genuine curiosity will motivate you through graduate school and beyond. Another component is challenge and growth. For a successful graduate experience, you want to challenge yourself, whether that means diving deep into a very specific content area or a topic through your coursework, or your research, or whether that's going into a new area to broaden your scope or apply your skills that you've gained from undergrad to a new research area, a new topic, a new question. It could also be choosing something that is maybe not something that you don't already know about, that's different than what you've done before, and challenges you to learn new skills, technique, or new knowledge that you maybe don't already have. So when I entered grad school, I was very, detail-oriented. My background was cell molecular biology, and I may have entered immunology, but I was really focused on these very specific processes and the steps and order of them. When I picked my advisor, I picked someone who was a really big picture thinker. He was an innovator, came up with these big questions, and kind of relied on me to pay attention to the details oftentimes. But I knew that in choosing him, what I wanted to gain was that ability to think big, to see, take a step back and see the big picture, the impact, and the potential. Of course, there were times during our graduate career where there were miscommunications, or, he was thinking here and I was thinking here, and we had to adjust and meet each other in the middle. But through the process of, engaging in that conversation and that discussion, it really allowed me to grow as a researcher immensely, to be able to see not just the minutia, but also the big picture. And so that's one way to kind of challenge yourself. But of course, don't put yourself in an overly difficult situation with an advisor or in a program that you feel you can't be successful at. So we may have thought differently, but I knew that he cared about me and supported me in my research. So it's important to have that as well. Next is intention. So work with intention. And as Smitty said, understand, the why of going into graduate school, but also your plans and goals for after. It's okay if this changes over time. I entered thinking I wanted to be a faculty member, and I left deciding to be an assistant director of life design. It's okay for your plans to change, but knowing what you're working for and working towards will really help keep you, give you clarity and focus as you're doing the work. It'll help you determine where to put your time and energy, and it will really help motivate you during some of the more challenging times in graduate school, to have that eye on what you're aiming for. And then lastly, I cannot stress this enough, having community and support is crucial for a graduate school experience. If you do your research and you talk to people and you feel like you can't connect with the program, with the students in there, the peers, the campus culture, the city or town or location you're going to be in, then you're going to have a difficult time when you're there. There's this image of this solitary graduate student who's toiling away by themselves, in a dark room or in the library or in the lab. But that's really not what graduate school is like nowadays. Graduate school is highly, highly collaborative, interactive, interdisciplinary. And so it's important to have a strong network within, the work, the coursework, the research, the program, but then also outside, recognizing that you are more than just what you're learning and what you're doing in your program, that you have these people outside, family, friends, people in student groups that you're a part of, who you can talk to, rant with, celebrate with, and have all of these moments that really encourage and empower you throughout graduate school. I see some questions in the chat. How do you get to go to things? I would say talk to your network and people that who are in the field about what you might be a competitive applicant for. And similar to undergrad, you might want to apply to some that you think, are kind of like these goal or dream schools, other schools that you would be a good fit with and that you would really enjoy. And then other schools that from all of your research, you think you could be successful at, but you maybe want to learn more about. And so you apply, with the intention of getting to know a little bit more about the school, if you were to receive an interview or were to visit. I would say not to apply to things that don't meet the criteria that I'm about to show you. And I'll get to some of these next questions in a second. So the big question, how many is too many? How many should I apply to? And the answer is as many as you feel you can be successful at while you're there, be successful after, so it aligns with what your overall goals are, or provides you with the support and flexibility to pivot and determine that while you're there. Ones that you can articulate a clear fit. And so oftentimes, when you're reaching graduate school, you're kind of narrowing down on a particular field or subfield topic. You're becoming part of a community. And, when writing your applications, your personal statements, when talking to people, when interviewing, you'll begin to feel what places might be a good fit for you, the way you work, the way you think, the questions you like to ask. And as long as you feel that there's a clear and distinct fit that you can articulate, in your application, in your interviews to them, then that's a school worth considering. And then lastly, I say apply as many as you can apply to with conviction. You would be surprised. I handled recruitment for our immunology program 1 year and helped out a number of other years. You'd be surprised how many people reach that final level of being invited to interview for our graduate program. When you ask them what they like about it, they say, "Oh, the weather," or "It's a nice campus." And you want to be able to apply to a place with conviction. If you were to get an invite to interview there or meet with them or talk to them or join the program, and that it wouldn't be a good fit right out the bat, then I would say save your time and maybe consider not applying unless you get more information. All right, so I give you a lot of kind of big picture thinking about things you should consider and do. But what about you've gathered all this information, you've narrowed it down, but you're kind of struggling with actually eliminating some number down to something you think you could reasonably apply to with conviction. So here are 4 tips or things you can do or try to help you. The first is Excel. So I made an Excel spreadsheet with all of the values, what was important to me, location, community, research type, program, funding, support, all of these things on the left as a rows, and then each school on the top. And I gave each one a score out of 5 or out of 10. And then you tally it up at the bottom. You might not want to go exactly by what the score is, but oftentimes going through this process of giving each thing a score allows you to consider and evaluate each school on each of these criteria, and even just going through the process will help you kind of create a clearer picture. The next is if you're considering a couple of different, paths, maybe different types of programs, different degrees, different focuses, you can, make some sort of fantasy bracket where you compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges. Maybe you have 6 or 7 schools or programs that meet a certain need or criteria, and you can narrow those down by comparing each other, narrow that down to 2 or 3, and then, another group of things, you narrow that down to 2 or 3. You don't need one at the very end, but this comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges can help you in making sure you're allocating your time and applying to each one fully. Lastly, a technique I love is let the coin decide. And so you can go school by school and take a coin and say, if it's heads, I'm going to apply, and if it's tails, I'm not going to apply. You flip the coin, you see what the coin says, but rather than following the coin, pay attention to your initial reaction, right? So if you flip the coin and it says you're going to apply, and your first reaction is, excitement or butterflies in your stomach, or, you're like, oh yeah, then that means deep down you probably, really wanted to apply. There was something you liked, something that appealed. Maybe you couldn't articulate it clearly, but deep down you felt that there was some sort of fit there that you could investigate more. If you flip a coin and it says apply, and your first feeling is dread, or maybe fear, or maybe you're like, then maybe that means deep down you didn't feel that fit that you were looking for. Maybe you have that school on the list because other people tell you it's a great school, it's a big name, you have to consider it. But deep down, when you've talked to people, you've done your research, in your heart of hearts that it isn't a great fit for you, or a place where you feel like you'd be happy or could be successful. Sometimes doing this technique can kind of reveal that gut feeling and allow you to investigate further. And then the last technique is something that we love in the Life Design Lab, and it's got a number of different names, surrogacy, grokking it, but I like to call it just living it. Once you've narrowed down your list, but you still need to narrow it down more, maybe spend a couple of days imagining what life would look like at that school. Look up, apartment rentals in the city or housing costs. Look up what you might do on a day-to-day, restaurants you might want to visit, activities you might want to do on the weekends. Really spend some time imagining what it would look like to be a graduate student there, and you'll get a better picture of how that fits for you. Questions in the chat, but But lastly, as we narrow down, and start crossing things off the list, we reach this point usually where we're uncertain. We're like, well, what if I cross something out that would have been good for me? And I bring us back to that JAM study, right? They were able to sample as many as they wanted, but of course we have a certain bandwidth for what we're able to do in terms of our research and how much we're willing to commit to that. Not willing or able, we have plenty of things on our plate. But if you've tasted these 2 jams and you loved one of them, and you've gone through this process of really identifying what matters to you, talk to people, and you feel, then I can say, and I have this on the right, that any of these paths that you've gone through this process for will be a successful path for you. You will have done the work of identifying a place where you can be happy and successful. And as we say in Life Design, you'll be able to continue to work in that supportive environment and build your way forward. And so if you have a list of 20 and you're narrowing it down and you're worried about all the other ones, just remember that if you've gone through this process, whatever number you arrive at the end, those are the schools you can be happy and successful at. And so I say narrow it down and do so with conviction, knowing that you've done the work to make sure you're making the right decision. All right, so we have a few minutes here, and I'm going to get to some of the questions in the chat that I was not able to get to. And if you have questions, please continue to write them in the chat. I will continue to speak until about 11:49 or so we can close out. Physical climate is also important. I'm from San Diego, which is a very dry, hot, and Baltimore summers are not fun. Fall's probably my favorite season because it can be as sunny as San Diego, but also cold. Yeah, location, climate is really important. In Seattle, it is kind of cloudy almost year-round, with the exception of a month or two. And I have friends who are from sunny areas and they love the sun, they love being outdoors. And so something like that might be difficult for them. It's important to take a number of different factors and understand how important those are for you. How do you find something that you want to put 5 years of your life into when you may have never tried it? Additionally, how would you compare a general interest area versus a specific one during applications? I would say try it as best you can. And so I took a year working as a research tech to figure out what I wanted to do, if I wanted to go to grad school, what path I wanted to pursue, and discovered that immunology was probably for me the best way to do the type of research I wanted to do. And that it was something I had never tried. And so I moved into an immunology research lab in that postbac because I was like, if I'm going to commit, 5 or 6 years to this, it's something that I want to see if I enjoy and if I love. I think oftentimes we feel that there's this pressure to apply, and jump right in. But sometimes taking a year or two, what we call nowadays bridge years, is really helpful in kind of defining. And if you can do something that allows you to try it, whether it's in your full-time position or volunteering in a lab or doing part-time lab work, if you're doing lab, or working on a research project on the side, or contacting an old professor and saying, I've graduated, but I'm really interested in pursuing maybe graduate school. Is there anything I can work on or help, as a volunteer or pro bono, basically, so that I can get some more experience and understand if this is the right fit for me. And it is hard to narrow down your interest area. I would say, narrow it down to a scope, but you don't need to know the exact, it depends. Some programs you need to know the lab you want to join or the research group you want to join. You'll need to have reached out and made those connections so that when you apply, it's clear, exactly where you're going, and you'll have the support of that faculty member. Other programs are broader, more umbrella programs. You might do rotations in different research groups or in different labs. And for those, you should have some ideas of things that interest you, but don't need a specific final decision. You'll have some room to decide as you get there. All right, and we're at 11:59. And then last question, for students who were only moderately successful on the first try, how would you recommend reevaluating what to apply? Would you recommend broadening the range of schools to apply to? And again, I say, follow those criteria when broadening. If you are broadening just for the sake of applying to more places, but you don't feel like you can apply authentically and with conviction, and it's not a good fit, then don't increase. I would suggest don't increase your numbers just for the sake of doing so. But there might be schools out there that are a good fit. And then for those who are moderately successful on the first try, definitely talk to people in your network and try to get help on how to maybe strengthen your application, and incorporate what you're learning now in this additional time into your application, and reinforce how that has further solidified your commitment, and apply again. Oftentimes when schools see a student that has applied a second time and has spent the year really kind of focusing and solidifying their motivation and commitment, that really does help to improve your application chances. And so we are at time. So I thank you all, and I'm going to hand it off to my colleague Karen to close out.
Thank you so much, Carlos. That was a really informative presentation. I'm sure everyone who attended learned a lot. I know I did. So thank you. The next session begins at 12:50. There's 3 different options. One session is how do I bring my identities to graduate school? And then there's also drop in just in like an instant message chat with either pre-professional advising if you have quick questions for them, or with some of our colleagues from the Life Design Lab. So I encourage you to visit our Life Design Lab website, and you can see all of the sessions happening both today, this afternoon, and tomorrow. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you at other sessions.
Thank you, everyone. Wonderful.
That was